Well, ladies and gentlemen, all of our PJTN watchmen, it's Laurie Cardoza Moore with my annual Thanksgiving message. And for those of you who've been with PJTN for a long time, you know that every year I take this moment to share with our audience the connection between the Judeo-Christian establishment of our country. And one of my favorite websites to go to that always has great stories about the Jewish and Christian connection or Judeo-Christian values of America and our founding is aish.com. So I found a great article. I'm going to share some of the excerpts out of this article with you because I think it's important, again, for us to understand that we are a Judeo-Christian nation in the United States of America. And despite our challenges, as people of faith, people of the book, that's us, Jews and Christians, who this nation was founded upon. And it's our responsibility as people of the book to be a light unto the nations of the world. And as I said, we are, despite our challenges, we are facing some uncertain times ahead. But one thing that we all can agree upon is that it is our faith that helps us through some of the darkest times in our nation's history, in the history of the Israelites. And so it's always important for us to go back to God's word, to reflect on his word, and also to look back at what God has done in the past. That's what gives us hope and encouragement, especially during times like this. So this story is actually titled How Jews Helped to Create the Quintessential American Holiday. And so, again, I'm going to just share some excerpts with you that you can share with your family and friends. And I just encourage you to, if you're receiving this message because somebody forwarded it to you and you are not on our mailing list, I encourage you to go to pjtn.org, sign up to become part of our team. We have chapters and supporters all over the world. And so it's a great honor to be able to bring Jews and Christians together, people of faith, to unite us under a common theme and banner, and of course, under the God that we worship. So this little excerpt that I'm going to share with you is about the connection of our Thanksgiving holiday with the ancient biblical feast day called Sukkot. And those of you who celebrate Sukkot, you know exactly what I mean. But I'm going to share this with you because America's first Thanksgiving holiday took place in 1621, just a few months after the first Pilgrim settlers first landed on the shores of Cape Cod in Massachusetts. They arrived in the New World just as winter was approaching and spent their first few months in Massachusetts huddled on the Mayflower boat that had brought them from England, subsisting on the ship's stores of food. Fully half of the Pilgrims unfortunately perished over that first winter. Then when the weather began to improve, they ventured onto land. March 21st was the day the Pilgrims officially left the Mayflower and began to farm and build homesteads. The Pilgrims were aided by members of the local Abenaki, Pawtucket, and Wampanoag tribes, particularly by a Pawtucket man named Squanto. And we all remember the story about Squanto, who had an amazing history. He had been kidnapped some years previously by an English ship captain, had learned English, and eventually returned to his tribe in Massachusetts. With Squanto's aid, the Pilgrims succeeded in cultivating native crops. At harvest time, the Pilgrims declared a 3-day long fast, a feast of Thanksgiving to thank God for their harvest. Deeply religious Christians, the Pilgrims were well acquainted with the Hebrew Bible and Jewish holidays, including the autumn festival of Sukkot, when Jewish pilgrims brought offerings from their harvest to the temple in Jerusalem. Some see the first American Thanksgiving was an attempt to thank God for his beneficence in a new place and to a new set of pilgrims, a conscious imitation of Sukkot. And we do, I've talked about this on previous Focus on Israel shows, that the Puritans did see themselves as a modern day Israelite people. They saw their passing on the Mayflower, crossing the Atlantic Ocean as the same plight of the Israelites when they had to cross the Red Sea as they fled from Egypt. So there are a lot of correlations, a lot of connections that a lot of us really don't see. We overlook because we're not trained to see. We don't connect the history of ancient Israel with the history of the United States. But Pilgrim leader William Bradford had another Jewish custom in mind when he declared a service of Thanksgiving soon after the Pilgrims made landfall in 1620. He opened his Bible and led the Pilgrims in reciting Psalm 107. Incredibly, the annotations in Bradford's Bible, written by the English clergyman Henry Ainsworth, quoted the medieval Jewish sage Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, or also known as Rambam, whose legal work, the Mishnah Torah, directs Jews to recite a prayer based on Psalm 107 after making a dangerous journey and overcoming other obstacles. That's amazing. It seems that the very first American act of Thanksgiving had Jewish roots, as William Bradford incorporated Jewish traditions into his first Thanksgiving prayers in the New World. So again, even William Bradford, it further illustrates that the Puritans, the early settlers, the Pilgrims, saw themselves as ancient Israel. They always have. And that's why we have that connection in our founding documents. There's another, also during colonial times, it was common for colonies to declare special days of Thanksgiving at times of prosperity and good fortune. Sherith Israel, the oldest synagogue in America, eagerly took part. Established in 1654 by Sephardic Jews seeking refuge from the Portuguese Inquisition in Brazil. Sherith Israel, also known as the Spanish and Portuguese Synagogue, took part in various Thanksgiving celebrations that were declared by New York's colonial governor. Sherith Israel wrote new prayers and included prayers of Thanksgiving during these colonial Thanksgiving days. There were times, however, when New York's colonial governor insisted that special days of Thanksgiving had a specifically Christian character. This was true of other colonies as well, which sometimes insisted that days of Thanksgiving be celebrated with Christian prayers. At these times, Sherith Israel had no choice but to refrain from taking part. The synagogue's predicament became known to George Washington, thanks to the synagogue's leader, Gershom Mendes Sextus, the congregation's cantor, who was devoted to the cause of American independence, and his family. Many of Sherith Israel's members joined the Continental Army and fought with George Washington. Approximately 20 members of the synagogue died in America's Revolutionary War. After the war, Sextus was selected to be one of the small number of clergy people present at George Washington's presidential inauguration. When the new president declared a national day of Thanksgiving for the United States in 1789, he specifically made his day of thanks non-denominational, ensuring that his Jewish supporters could fully take part in America's first national Thanksgiving festival. Gershom Mendes Sextus' brother Moses was active in his own synagogue in Rhode Island, and that was the Toro Synagogue. Many of you have heard me talk about the Toro Synagogue. In fact, we did a Focus on Israel show about the Toro Synagogue. In 1790, 7 years after the conclusion of America's War of Independence, President George Washington visited that synagogue, and Moses Sextus delivered him a warm letter of affection on behalf of his congregation. President Washington responded with a letter of his own, in which he famously reiterated his strong belief that America was not to be a Christian nation, but one to which all peoples could equally contribute and call home. This is what George Washington said, quote, "All possess alike liberty of conscience and immunities of citizenship," Washington wrote. "For happily, the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, requires only that they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens, in giving it all on occasions their effectual support. It was a strong reminder that America's national character must include all its citizens, no matter what their religious persuasion. So I want to close with a comment that I found in here because, Thanksgiving is not only about giving thanks. That's the first and foremost, most important part of this special holiday. But Thanksgiving is also about food. And of course, one of the meals, or one of the side items of the traditional turkey and dressing or stuffing is green bean casserole. So I wanted to share with you the history of the green bean casserole and how it came about, because most families will have a green bean casserole on the table for Thanksgiving dinner. But this iconic green bean casserole topped with crunchy fried onions that many Americans enjoy on Thanksgiving has a remarkable story and was popularized in the 1950s by the Jewish food writer Cicely Brownstone. In 1955, Mrs. Brownstone wrote a story about a journalist dinner she'd attended at the home of John Snively Jr., a pioneering citrus grower in Florida. At the dinner, Mrs. Snively served a delicious green bean casserole and shared a remarkable story about that signature dish. The Sniveleys had recently hosted the Shah of Iran and his wife, and Mrs. Snively made her delicious green bean casserole. The Iranian queen was so taken with the dish that she kept asking about its ingredients. The Snively's butler answered each question until he finally lost his patience and told the royal, "Listen, lady, it's just beans and stuff." Cicely Brownstone realized this would make a great food article. She wrote it up